member for Mount Royal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in debate on Bill C-452 on the question of human trafficking and how best to combat it. In particular, this legislation seeks to strengthen the provisions that punish exploitation and trafficking in persons. Et je voudrais saluer mon collègue Dan Huntsik pour ce projet de loi et cette démarche très importante. La véritable mesure de l'engagement d'une société à l'égard des principes de l'égalité et de la dignité humaine se traduit dans la façon dont elle protège ses membres les plus vulnérables. Et les victimes de trafficking est parmi les plus vulnérables. Accordingly, we must recognize and denounce human trafficking as the persistent and pervasive assault on human rights that it is, while providing increased protection for those who are most vulnerable to this massive criminal violation of human rights, namely women and children. At the same time, as we work to bring the perpetrators to justice and ensure that human traffickers are held to account fully for this reprehensible criminal conduct. My remarks this evening will focus on the implications this bill will have for the justice system, while situating the debate in the broader context of how we ought to combat human trafficking. Mr. Speaker, the crime of human trafficking, as I have said many times in this House, is one of the most pernicious, persistent, and pervasive assaults on human rights. According to the 2012 United States State Department report on human trafficking, an estimated 27 million people worldwide each year are victims of various crimes of exploitation and servitude, while an estimated $32 billion is generated by this immoral and illegal trade, making it one of the fastest growing criminal industries in the world today. The struggle to eradicate this crime, therefore, must not only include, though it certainly must include that, legal tools to prosecute the offenders, but it must also include policies to protect and support the victims while engaging in public education efforts to promote awareness of the trends and the means used to exploit and traffic in the victims. Accordingly, a holistic approach to this problem would require addressing the social factors that allow the crime of exploitation to occur in communities across our country, while working with all levels of government and community leaders to identify trends and patterns of exploitation, to communicate with the victims, and to support the victims and their families during these moments of tremendous vulnerability. And I want to commend the member from Hunsik for her involvement in this regard with the various stakeholders for this purpose. Pour lutter contre la traite des personnes, il faut faire plus que de simplement adopter de nouvelles sanctions pénales. Par exemple, nous devons rectifier les lacunes de notre système d'immigration qui laisse les travailleurs temporaires et étrangers vulnérables face à l'exploitation et aux abus de leurs employeurs canadiens. Bill C-452 makes a number of important amendments to the criminal code. First, it provides for consecutive sentences to be served for human trafficking convictions. Second, it grants the Canadian judiciary jurisdiction over human trafficking offences, whether they are committed in Canada or abroad. Third, the bill clarifies the provisions related to human trafficking involving sexual exploitation. Fourth, it creates a presumption regarding the exploitation of one person by another. And finally, the bill adds the offences of procuring and trafficking in persons to the list of offences to which the forfeiture of proceeds of crime apply. All these proposed changes, Mr. Speaker, are indeed well-intentioned, but some are somewhat flawed, particularly when viewed from a charter perspective. The Liberal Party will support this legislation and vote to send this legislation to committee for further study and review in the hope that the concerns may be appropriately addressed. Let me begin with the provision I wholeheartedly support. The legislation expands the scope of the human trafficking provision in the Code to the international arena, an important and most welcome change to our laws. Simply put, the reach of this egregious trafficking crime is beyond our national borders, and our laws must therefore reflect this reality. For many human trafficking victims, exploitation may bring them to Canada. However, the original incident of abuse or threats made to their families occurs in far distant lands. We must seek justice not only for the final leg of this crime, but for the full scope of the abuse and cruelty inflicted on victims by their abusers. Accordingly, while I support that provision and the provisions relating to human trafficking that include sexual exploitation, as well as extending or adding the offences of procuring and trafficking to the list of offences to which the proceeds of crime will apply, I am concerned by some other sections of the legislation. For example, Bill C-452 provides that sentences imposed upon a conviction of human trafficking are to be served consecutively to any other sentence imposed in punishment for an offence arising out of the same event or series of events. I understand the well-intentioned motive behind this recommendation. My concern is that doing this can limit judicial discretion in a way that not only encroaches on judicial independence, but may, however inadvertently, result in sentences that infringe upon Charter-protected rights. Certainly these heinous acts should be punished severely, but there may be situations where the imposition of consecutive rather than concurrent sentencing is inadvisable. Indeed, this is why judges should be allowed to retain their discretion in this regard, though certainly at committee we could address whether it may be best to encourage such sentences while perhaps not specifically requiring them. As well, this bill establishes a presumption under Article 279.013 of the Criminal Code that may be overbroad. It reads out, and I quote, "A person who is not exploited and who lives with or is habitually in the company of or harbors a person who is exploited shall, in the absence of evidence to the contrary, be deemed to be exploiting or facilitating the exploiting of that person." Unquote. While one of the major issues in combating trafficking since the crime of exploitation was first introduced in our criminal code has been the low number of criminal convictions for this crime, we should nonetheless be very mindful of casting too wide a net, as this can raise both charter and common law concerns. Again, I am hopeful that this can be addressed at committee. Another change proposed by this legislation, which I support, as I mentioned, modifies Section 279 of the Criminal Code by enumerating the various elements of the crime of exploitation, particularly sexual services. This is an important change, in part because our own Department of Justice has found that trafficking for sexual exploitation is more prevalent in Canada than any other form of exploitation, especially in our large urban centres. By adding these new provisions in the Code, we will provide law enforcement officials with additional tools to take on this challenge and better protect the Canadian public. Let me reiterate, Mr. Speaker, that while it is vital that our criminal justice system be equipped to handle the full prosecution of this brutal crime, any success on this issue will only come with greater public awareness, mobilization, and participation in combating the crime to begin with. Because the perpetrators of human exploitation count on various social stigmas to isolate their victims, it is vital that we remove these stigmas and those barriers that prevent victims from seeking assistance. We must strengthen our grassroots strategy to detect and prevent human trafficking to begin with, as well as to support and protect victims in a manner that will enhance their cooperation and ability to report this abuse. Indeed, as a country looking to address this challenge, we must not only seek to punish those who do harm to the innocent, we must also seek to heal and care for those who have been harmed in this fashion. In summary, Mr. Speaker, I am hopeful that this bill will be improved in committee and applaud my colleague from Ahansik for bringing it forward and for her hard work on this issue, as well as that of the member for Kildonan St. Paul. I'm hopeful that by working together, we can eradicate this evil of human trafficking in Canada once and for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the reprise de débat of the honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And tonight, I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to support Bill C-452, an act to amend the Criminal Code, Exploitation and Trafficking in Persons. And as I listen to the speeches tonight, it warms my heart to see the members in this House that have worked together and are continuing to work together to stop this heinous crime in our country. I want to say the member from Mount Royal has done much over the years to stand up for human rights, and certainly his Bill C-49 did much to make awareness come to the forefront on human trafficking, and I thank him for that.